Okay, good morning, everyone. Thanks and hello to those who've just joined us since my first message a minute ago, but great to have you here in the session. So I think the numbers are creeping up slowly, but let's get started in the interests of time. So a big welcome back, everyone, to the second of our two-part workshops on gender equality in capital markets. So as I've said, if you want to reintroduce yourself in the chat as we're starting, feel free to do so. So we've got a really packed schedule again today, so we'll get started and make sure you have all of your resources to get moving with. So firstly, a big thank you again to all of our stock exchanges involved in bringing you together for today's session, for hosting us, and for this really collaborative training effort developed between IFC, UN Women, Columbia University, and the government of Luxembourg. So for anyone who might have missed part one and is joining us for the first time today, you can find on the SSE event page for this event the recording to today's session. And we'll share the link to this multiple times in the chat, but please have a look there for the recording. And this is also where you can find the handouts of today's slides and Monday's slides, Wednesday's slides, apologies as well. So please make sure to look on that page that Landon's just shared the link to if you'd like to see the slide handouts or any of the recordings. So all the housekeeping points will be familiar for those who joined us last time, but just a quick reminder that participants, you're muted, but please do make sure to use the chat and the Q&A option to give us your thoughts and opinions and questions on this content as we move along. And then also we have, sorry, excuse me, just stopping the video there. And then also in terms of housekeeping from today's session, so we have live facilitation throughout the session. We have live opportunities to ask your questions as we move along, so please do make the most of that. Your participation, as we say, is really encouraged in the mentees and the polls that we do throughout the session. And finally, we will also have an opportunity to receive a completion certificate for taking part in today's training. So to receive that certification, you need to fill out the feedback survey, which we'll share with you as well at the end. So stay tuned for the instructions about how to get that certificate towards the end of today's session. So just to reintroduce the speakers who will be covering today's session, we've got some familiar faces and some new ones. So you have myself and Landon again from the UN SSE team. And we're also, hi Landon, we're happy to be joined again by Anna from the UN Women team and the Europe and Central Asia office. Hi Anna. And then we're also happy to have some guest speakers joining us again today. So we have Vitaline Coppet from the Luxembourg Stock Exchange, who's going to be sharing with us a case study on Lux SE's work on gender bonds. And secondly, we have David Pritchett from the EDGE Certified Foundation. So you might remember we mentioned the EDGE standard last week, or early in the week, I should say. And yeah, David will be here later in the session to tell us a little bit more about that. So as a quick reminder, we've got 4 modules that we're covering in this course, which have been developed to really help walk you through the 4 steps for improving gender equality performance for global markets. So today we're going to be focusing on the second 2 steps, which are implement and communicate. So this is really building off what we learned last session. So hopefully if you're able to join us for that, you'll have got that real foundation in terms of preparing an alignment. And so just an important thing to say here as well is that we know that this is an ongoing process. So although we've started to present these items to you in a certain sequence, of course, we recognize in practice, you're likely to be working continually across all of these areas together. And that's more, realistic for many organizations. So you, of course, need to take your own approach and sequencing here, but we hope this is a helpful structure to think through. So for today's session, we have 2 main objectives for our training, which we're hoping we're going to be able to achieve in these 2 hours together. So firstly, we'd like to help you to understand how to capture market value for gender equality performance, be that through gender smart investment strategies or through the creation of gender-focused financial products. And secondly, we'd like to help you today to communicate gender-related information with internal stakeholders for effective communication. and to identify the guidelines that you can use for communicating gender-related information with external stakeholders to really know what information investors are looking for in corporate reports. And so to achieve these objectives, we've planned around 45 minutes for each of these 2 units today. We'll have a short break in the middle of the session again, and we'll wrap up the session with sharing some resources to help you take away and continue your learning at the end of the programme. But to get us started with today's session, we'd like to get a sense from everyone as to how much you know about the topics we're going to be focusing on today, about gender lens, investment, and disclosure. So we have another quick Menti exercise, and you'll know that we'll come back to Menti a few times. So make sure to find your way into Menti now, and we'll use it a couple of times throughout the session. But yeah, if you can join us there, then we can get a sense from you all as to what your current understanding is on these areas. So I'll also share the screen now, and that will give you another way to join us in Menti, which is to utilize the option to enter the code that you see at the top of the screen there. So if you go to menti.com, you can enter that 8-digit code, but the easiest way is probably to click that link that Landon has shared with you. Okay, thanks for those who've voted so far. So I see at the moment, we're coming out mostly kind of in the middle of the scale in terms of our comfort and understanding around these areas, around investment strategies, communicating to investors, and explaining the financial value of gender. So a little bit of a range, particularly on the investment side, but overall probably a little bit lower than our comfort on those topics that we talked about in Wednesday's session. So hope we can help you to develop that understanding in the training today. Okay, and then I've got a second question for you to get started. And this is just a quick test, really, to see if you were listening to something that we covered in a little bit of detail last time, and which we'll recap on after we've asked you the questions. So I think we've got all of you in who are going to play, and then I'll hit go. One more came in there. Oh, training crab at the last minute. Great. So let's hit enter, and you get a couple of seconds just to think about your answer to this question, which is, what is the objective here? Is it equity or equality? So 30 seconds just to have a quick think, see if you can remember, it might, as a hint, come from that diagram of that equation we talked about the different variables here and how to balance those. So just a quick question on what do you think the overall objective is here? Is it equity or equality? And then we'll go into a little bit of a recap on that terminology after that. Alrighty, so it looks like we've got a reasonably even split, but more of you generally thinking the answer is equality rather than equity. And so indeed, the majority there were correct. Equality is the overall objective of this, although equity, of course, is an important part of that equation. But let's just have a quick recap now in the slides on why that is the case. So here's a quick reminder of the diagram that we were talking about there. And as I said, the central objective overall is equality. So what do we mean by this? So as a recap, diversity is around ensuring that everyone has representation. And this can include different sexes, genders, cultures, ethnicities, races, religions, ages, and disabilities, and many more factors. So this is the seat at the boardroom table. Equity is about recognizing and reorganizing power distribution. So this is all around being able to speak. So although, as we say, equity is one important part of the equation, it's a little bit different to equality. So we think of equity as being providing the microphone to those who perhaps are currently quiet in the conversation. And then last but not least, we must ensure inclusion. And this is about ensuring that everyone feels welcomed and is given their equal opportunity to connect, belong, and grow, to contribute to the organization, advance their careers, and feel comfortable and confident being their authentic selves. So we can say that inclusion is kind of like having the interpretation or headsets that allow everyone to understand each other and to feel welcome. So ultimately, if diversity is about counting people, inclusion is about making the people themselves count. So hopefully that's helpful as just a quick recap on those terms. But I see most of you got that right as well. So well done there. And just to recap on a couple of other things that we covered in our first session. So we firstly talked about impact. And if you remember, we learned that improving gender equality provides many benefits to society and the economy beyond the boardroom or the corporate environment. And it's also important to remind everyone here that what we didn't say was that women themselves necessarily drive these benefits. It's important to remember that it's the equality part that has this impact, but that ultimately those impacts can also lead to a number of important benefits for companies as well, in terms of increased profitability, transparency, and potentially improved environmental impacts as well. And then we also learned about the UN Women's Empowerment Principles, and Anna shared with you how you can use these principles to get started on enhancing gender equality. So you'll see there that measurement and reporting is the 7th principle, and that's something we'll go into with Anna in a bit more detail later on in today's session. And finally, a brief reminder from last session of some of the actions that are important here relating to corporate culture. If you remember, we had our case study where we talked about those 2 companies, Owl Inc. and Peacock PLC, and how their different approaches had quite different impacts for the corporate culture, even though they were ultimately aiming for the same objective. So important, as we said, to keep in mind that the culture it plays a really key role here. And when we're talking about communications later on, we'll talk a little bit about internal communications with employees and leadership as well. Okay, with that, we're going to be starting on our first module of today's 2-part training. So we'll be moving into accessing gender lens finance in the implementation phase. So with this, we're going to be passing over to Landon, who'll be taking us through the introduction to this section.
Great. Thanks so much, Fiona, and welcome again, everyone. It's great to be here with you today. So for this next section, excuse me, on implement, we're going to be discussing implementation and gender equality, and we'll talk a bit about products that support market action, and we'll also look at mechanisms that add value and promote gender equality in markets. So first, let's look at how financial products are being used to support gender equality and what opportunities lie within those financing mechanisms for gender-allied companies. To get started, I wanted to direct you towards this chart, which shows some trends we're seeing in sustainable finance more broadly. So this chart you can find in the UNCTAD World Investment Report. It shows that in 2023, the total number of sustainability-themed funds worldwide increased, but the growth rate was a bit slower since 2021. The total stands at about 7,500 funds. That's up 7% from just 2022, and those funds are worth about 3 trillion. Now, I will note there's a bit of a decrease in 2023, but that was due to other factors. So in terms of the global net investment flows to sustainable funds, that was due to depressed asset values, investor withdrawals amid persistent market uncertainties, including high inflation, rising interest rates, poor market returns, and the risk of a recession. So as such, sustainability-themed funds still remain an important tool to direct capital towards sustainable development. We're also seeing a significant growth in gender lens investment. However, the data on gender lens investing is much more difficult to measure, so we have less clear of an idea of the exact magnitude of funds that consider those factors. We don't have enough time today to dive totally into this topic, but we provided you with some extra slides in your handout on this issue or topic. So if this is something you wish to look into more, you can review the handout slides after today's workshop. And I know we've already shared the handout slides once or twice, and we'll keep sharing them throughout the presentation. But as mentioned, there's a lot more resources in those slides as well. With that, you might be asking yourself, what is gender lens investing exactly? So let's take a moment to discuss this. So if I can ask everyone that's participating, if you can share in the chat, what do you think gender lens investing is? What does that mean to you? How would you define it? Or maybe you know an official definition if you really are passionate or work in this space. Or if you're maybe less knowledgeable, feel free to just share a few words about what you think gender lens investing is in the chat. So we'll give you a few seconds to see some answers. It's a quiet group this morning, but hopefully some more answers come in. But Daniela notes integration of gender perspective into investment. Okay, that's great. Supporting women-owned or women-led businesses. Okay, really good answer. Another participant notes that they think it's investing that considers gender-based factors. Okay, very good. And another answer just popped up. Investments that have a goal of a positive gender impact. Yeah. Impact is a good word there as well. It's something we'll unpack a little bit more too. And then Irina notes strategy to investing from gender perspective. And I'll leave it at this last submission, gender consideration in investing process. So yeah, those are all really great answers. So we'll look at an official definition now. So the Global Impact Investing Network defines gender lens investing as investment strategies applied to an allocation or to the entirety of an investment portfolio which seeks to examine gender dynamics to better inform, I know someone mentioned inform investment decisions and/or intentionally and measurably address gender disparities. So as the name Gender Lens Investing makes clear, gender is a lens. It's a way of seeing that helps an investor highlight opportunity, illuminate risk, and understand strategy in a more nuanced way. So you might ask now, how are investors using that gender lens to make investment decisions? And there's many different strategies. So some of the core strategies we look specifically at on focus on investment strategy with a gender lens, but often we will see a combination of multiple or all of these strategies to varying degrees. The most common strategy you may or may not be familiar with is a focus on leadership. So perhaps that's taking a gender lens to look at women in leadership, such as on boards. We also see other areas of investment strategies focusing on, say, employees, maybe pay equity, for example, supply chains, products, services, and maybe community advocacy or initiatives. Well, at the firm level, fund managers can drive the adoption of gender lens or gender smart investing by starting with their own investment house. So fund managers can strengthen the gender diversity of their own teams, for example, by the leadership setting clear targets or building a respectful workplace culture and policies or making public commitments to gender diversity. The IFC's also developed a framework that we link to in this slide that includes designing a gender smart investment strategy, engaging, training, and rewarding people within the firm, enhancing or adopting investment processes and systems, and identifying and collaborating with partners and external stakeholders at the firm level. So that's a bit about the firm level. Now, switching gears to the portfolio level, fund managers can adopt strategies in both origination and portfolio management. So sorry, I went a slide too far. There's about 5 strategies we highlight. They enable fund managers to allocate capital to companies that are committed to these 5 key areas you see now on your screen. So as mentioned, women's leadership as founders, co-founders, senior management, or perhaps board members. a gender diverse and equitable workforce, a gender inclusive value chain, also offering and designing products or services that consider the distinct needs of women, and also ensuring that their operations do no harm to women in the community that they're operating. The good news is that as the benefits of gender diversity have become more widely recognized, investor demand for gender smart investment opportunity is increasing considerably. This has led to the emergence of a variety of gender-focused financial products across different asset classes. So we have a brief overview of the Gender Lens investment universe, and we can now take a look at how investment can be channeled towards gender equality and gender smart investments. On the left-hand side of the screen, you'll see a few answers or a few buckets in terms of the financial products that can be used to direct financial flows towards gender equality. That includes equity-based financial products such as shares of companies with high performance when applying a gender equity lens. Can also be debt or fixed income financial products, whether that be a mutual fund, exchange traded fund, can be also corporate or sovereign debt. So there's debt and fixed income, and that it can be another great vehicle. Now, let's take a look at what this looks like in practice by diving a bit more into some case studies that can shed some light onto what this really looks like in the real world and in practice. So the first case study builds on what we discussed earlier in the week on Wednesday about how climate and gender benefits can coexist. So this example comes from Gold Standard, an organization that was established about 20 years ago by WWF and some other international NGOs to ensure projects that reduce carbon emissions feature the highest levels of environmental integrity and also contribute to sustainable development. In this case study looks at the Lango Safe Water Project in Uganda. The Lango Safe Water Project received the first ever Gold Standard Gender Responsive certification 5 years ago, and the project rehabilitates boreholes to provide clean water in rural Uganda. And as of August 2023, credits were available to purchase on the Gold Standard Marketplace, which offers purchasers the option to choose carbon credits from a project which has been rigorously assessed to reduce gender equality. And with that, there's a lot of measurable social and climate impacts of this project to date, such as 50,000 tons of CO2 emission reductions every year. 40,000 individuals are now enjoying clean water access, reducing incidences of waterborne illness as well. Each household has gained 4 hours gained per household, and that's all of more time from reduced water collection needs, and that's saving time mostly for women and young girls. And that's also reduced school absenteeism with less exposure to waterborne disease and also less time spent collecting water. We can look even further into the gender equality impact of the project, which also notes that the local water resource committee is approaching parity with 46% female to 54% male representation. Reported incidences of domestic violence related to water collection have dropped to 0 compared to 35% prior to the project start. And 100% of the surveyed water users spend the time saved on domestic work, as well as income generating activities and social leisure activities. So there's just so many benefits of this project. I'll also note that Gold Standard, when certifying projects for carbon credits, have 2 levels of gender analysis. One is mandatory, one is voluntary. From the mandatory side, all projects must achieve a gender sensitivity status. In addition, they have the option of becoming gender responsive, which requires a deeper analysis and setting gender-related goals and targets. There's one more example about a gender bond. You can review this in your handout. That example comes from IFC and their Banking on Women program. I highly, highly recommend checking out the IFC's Banking on Women website, as they have so many great examples and resources. We will share that in the chat. Please do check that out. in your spare time. But in the interest of time, we'll keep going and dive a bit deeper into what exactly it means to list or invest in gender bonds. So I'll turn it back over to Fiona to talk us through gender bonds.
Thanks so much, Landon. Apologies, my camera, there we go, it's focused again. Sorry, everyone. Seems to go a little bit out of focus, but brilliant. Thanks so much for introducing those examples, Landon. And as Landon shared, we do encourage you to make use of the extra detail that we provided in the slide handout as well, with a few additional case studies there. But now, as we said, we're going to dive a little bit deeper into looking at this type of bond and what it could mean. So what exactly are gender bonds? So to get us started, I'm going to introduce broadly where the focus sits within the bonds market. But then Vitaline from the Luxembourg Stock Exchange has joined us, and she'll be giving a bit more of a detailed update on this following my introductions. But in terms of covering the basics, as you can see here, gender-focused bonds are a subset of bonds within the green, social, and sustainable bond universe. So gender bonds are often not seen as a category of bonds in themselves at the moment, like we see perhaps conversely for green bonds, but increasingly we're seeing bonds that have a gender focus, either by setting distinct KPIs relating to gender or linked to projects that support or enhance gender equality. So what I want to highlight here is that we can also see a distinct overlapping with green bonds for climate and gender co-benefit, which of course Landon just talked us through in that gold standard case study that we just heard about, where the climate and the gender benefits were closely interconnected. If we look at the debt markets, we can see that overall there has been a growth in sustainable finance through bonds in recent years, although it's fair to say a little bit of a leveling off in recent times as well. So this data we're showing here is taken from the UNCTAD World Investment Report 2024, and this shows that the cumulative global issuance of sustainable bonds sat at $1.5 trillion in 2023. And so although we have seen declines since 2020, this was found to be in line with the broader bond market. So it's clear that social and mixed sustainability bonds remain on an overall growth trajectory, because if we look back to 2018, for example, we've actually seen a fourfold growth since 2023 in that time frame. So whilst many of us are perhaps familiar with the terms around green bonds, it's important to notice that specifically since 2020, we have seen this growth in sustainability and social bonds with these gender-related objectives. And so there are a number of guidelines that can help us to determine what actually qualifies as a gender bond. And importantly, these guidelines are useful whether you're the issuer of such a bond or an investor looking at investing in bonds that contribute to real gender equality impacts. So you can see on the screen two examples of these. So we have firstly the social bond principles, which provide guidelines for issuing social bonds, and also the Climate Bonds Initiative's methodology to determine whether to include a bond in its social and sustainability bond database. And what we think is most important to highlight from these guidelines is that they help to build trust in the market and ensure that social bonds are designed to achieve their intended positive objectives. So it's not enough to call something a gender-focused bond. We actually need to understand the intended impact and whether or not that impact is being achieved. So as I said, that's just a brief introduction to this topic. So to help bring that to life a little bit more with a real world example, I'm very pleased to be joined by Vitaline Copé from the Luxembourg Stock Exchange. So many thanks again, Vitaline, and over to you for your presentation.
Thanks a lot, Fiona. Can you hear me?
I can, yes. I'll just stop my screen share at this end and should hopefully allow you to share yours.
Perfect. Thanks a lot.
And just let us know when you want us to play the video as well, and we can do that.
Okay, perfect. Thank you. So, as Fiona said, my name is Vitaline Copé. I work at the Luxembourg Stock Exchange, more precisely within the Luxembourg Green Exchange. So we are really specializing in sustainable bonds. And we have cooperated and signed a memorandum of understanding in 2021 with UN Women to really join our forces and work further on gender finance. And for this, so the first step we took at the time was to highlight gender-focused bonds that were displayed on our platform. So we had to come up with a methodology that I will explain later. And we also published a study 2 years ago and a series of case studies. I will show you the link hereafter in the presentation. So what are gender-focused bonds? So Fiona already presented to you one illustration that actually comes from the publication from ICMA, IFC, and UN Women, a practitioner guide for using sustainable debt for gender equality. So they really, in 2021, published this publication, and they really give a concrete example and guidelines for issuers that want to issue bonds that will fund gender-related projects or SLB also with gender-related targets. Naturally, there is no gender bond principle from ICMA, but most of the bonds actually are social bonds or sustainability bonds, but we also have some green bonds and SLB. And it's also interesting that in 2020, ICMA added in the example of the list of target population in the social bond principle, a woman as target population example. So what is our definition of gender-focused bonds? Well, for use of proceed bonds, so just as a reminder, use of proceed bonds are green bond that will fund a green project, social bond that funds a social project, and sustainability bonds that fund green and social projects. For use of proceed bonds, they have to allocate part of their proceeds to gender-related projects. And how do we check that? We check that in the post-issuance reports, whether the issuer indicated allocated part of their proceeds to SDG 5. And sometimes we can already detect it at pre-issuance, but we will flag that only if the issuer committed to allocate all its proceeds to gender-related project SDG 5, because we know that sometimes the framework is really broad, but then the issuance will actually finance some of the projects that were initially listed in the framework. Then for SLB, sustainability-linked bonds. So as a reminder, those are bonds that set a target, a sustainable target, and the financial or structural characteristic of the bonds will depend on whether those targets are met or not. We will look at least one target is related to gender equality or gender empowerment. So now I will give you a very concrete example. We have an example from EQT, which is a financial company. So they have issued SLB with 3 targets, one related to greenhouse gas carbon footprints and 2 to gender related topics. So the first target is to increase the share of women in the investment advisory teams. And the second target is to increase the percentage of women appointed in the board of the companies within their investment portfolio. So they have set one target for their team and one target for their investment portfolio companies. Then another example is from the Japanese cosmetic company Shiseido in Japan. They have set a target to increase the share of female leaders in their organization in Japan to 40%, up from 32%. What is interesting is that the share of women in their management team was already above the national average, but they were committed and said that this was not enough and they wanted to aim for a higher. for women to really have a voice in their entity. What is also interesting is that if they fail to meet the target, they decided that they will then give 0.1% of the issued amount to a public interest organization supporting gender equality, women empowerment, or environmental preservation, because they have another target on a link to environmental, and they actually already achieve their target ahead of time. Another example is from Chile, that issue a SLB with a target to have at least 40% of women on board of companies reporting to the Financial Market Commission. So they really wanted to send a message, starting with public organization, but also to be hopefully spread to the private sectors to have more women on the board of companies. Then I will here just give 2 examples on use of proceeds bonds. So it's actually here an example from IFC that with proceeds that are allocated to 2 types of projects. One is banking on women that I think Fiona or London mentioned earlier. So those banking on women projects will generally involve IFC lending to financial intermediaries, which are required to lend to women-owned enterprise. And then the second type of project focus on the base of the economic pyramid. So this project aim to integrate individual into value chain, supplier, distributor, customer, in a scalable and commercial viable way. So they will really focus on vulnerable underserved communities, vulnerable population, and women. And then you can see this is an extract on the right from the impact report. So they really look at what was the specific impact for women. Then we have a video, but that I will ask to be run just after, because I want just to show also here the link. I can send the slides after for those who want to read more on what we have published. So we published a study on the state of the market that we will, by the way, update in the coming months. And we also publish a series of case studies really showcasing real example around the world with UN women. And then I will ask Fiona to run the video with the example we have from Tanzania, a commercial bank, an MB bank, which also supports loans and funds, loans specific to women.
Brilliant. Thanks so much, Vitaline. I think Landon's just going to get that video up
Okay.
for us now.
Thank you. Thanks a lot.
It's a commercial bank, universal commercial bank, based in Tanzania, East Africa, that serves retail clients, corporate clients, and governments. I'm the treasurer for the bank, so main responsibility really is around mobilizing funds, so liquidity management, foreign exchange risk management, interest risk management, and coordination, just to make sure that there's balance sheet optimization and as well as capital allocation. So our gender bond really is a use of proceeds bond, that we issued in line with the international capital markets principles under the social bonds framework that allows us to raise money from the public and finance, women-owned businesses or enterprises that are dominantly owned by women, or businesses whose products and services actually eventually, service the female. Women proposition is a very important segment for our bank. And yes, we had a very fantastic proposition for women's savings, but we realized on the financing side, we need to do something to mobilize additional funding to support growth for women-owned businesses. So we felt it was necessary for us, because a strategic fit for us is really to diversify portfolio. And given the risk profile of women as far as loans is concerned, we realized that the non-performing loans ratios are actually lower than that of the male counterparts. Yes, so the projects we tend to finance, or that we're financing with these, are predominantly female-owned enterprises, and it cuts across different sectors, be it renewable energy, agriculture, health, education, and manufacturing as well. Obviously, it would be interesting that we measure the number of new loans that are issued to MSEs, so micro to medium and small enterprises women. But also it will be interesting for us, and we're doing that, to measure what impact that is having on their social and economic life. So how many jobs are created? Are they growing? Are they not? Are they expanding their businesses? I think those kind of metrics are very important, and it's part of our KPIs in ensuring that these funds actually put to the right use. Indeed, we've issued other types of bonds, retail bonds, corporate bonds. The difference with this gender bond is that the use of proceeds requires a lot of transparency. Investors require that you go back to them to tell them, how these funds have been used. But in addition to that, it has to go in line with, the social bond principles, and in line with the international capital markets, principle on social bonds. As opposed to the other bonds that you could simply raise and finance all manner of activities, without accountability to the investors. This requires significant accountability and transparency as far as investors are concerned. It was very well received by investors, domestic investors, and as well as international investors. As a matter of fact, it got 197% oversubscription. So we had significant appetite seeing from international financiers, but as well as domestic retail and corporate investors. I think one obvious one was the misconception, that you have a gender bond in the market, financing women, and therefore there was a perception that perhaps the bond subscribers were meant to be female. And so it requires a lot of effort, marketing efforts, to ensure that the male counterparts actually understood that it's not just for female, but they could also invest to help advance female. So that was a key challenge for us. But the other one is obviously data quality, especially in some of these emerging markets, still remains to be an issue. So you need to capture the right data at onboarding stage becomes very important, because you really get to realize how critical that is when you're doing your impact measurement and reporting. But the other aspect is the opportunities are still huge. The financing gap for female generally is still quite huge, and that is why there's need for us perhaps also to consider scaling up, such insurances, going forward. Yes, just related to the previous question. So we realize we need to do more still, so certainly we need to raise more funding, be it domestically, be it partnering with DFIs or development financial institutions, to just make sure that we can scale up, that portfolio. The need is there. I think we need to answer a very critical question of affordability, which keeps coming up, and hopefully using things like guarantee schemes from some of these development financial institutions will enable us actually affordably extend credit to female entrepreneurs. I think critical for me, again, back to what I've said, is data, at the onboarding stage. You need to get it right. But at the same time, just ensuring that indeed you have a pipeline sufficient enough to be covered whatever amount of bonds you want to raise, because ultimately investors demand, that level of transparency and accountability to see that these bonds are actually put to the intended use.
Hey, excellent. Thank you so much. Vitalina, I just wanted to check, was that, did you have anything to finish the presentation, or were you finishing with the video? Sorry, just checking.
Thank you. I'm more or less finishing, so I just wanted to stress that in this video, I think a lot of important and key aspects of the market are raised, including the need to scale up the gender-focused bond market, the difficulty to have metrics, impact metrics, also specific to women, and also the importance of the awareness and raising attention from both male and female investors. And thank you. And if you have any question after the call, don't hesitate to reach out. And I wish
Brilliant.
you a good rest of the session.
Thank you so much. We're actually slightly ahead of time, so if you wouldn't mind, I did check to see if we had any questions from participants, and I just see, I would just say, great video, so that's good. But maybe if I could ask you a question, if that's okay, just since we have a bit of it available. I wanted to check really, I think we kind of got an example in the video there, but from your experiences working with, issuers and investors on this, would you have, I guess, any top tips? I think we probably have a mix of financial institutions and companies on this. So perhaps maybe one tip for investors who might be thinking about investing in social bonds, and maybe one tip for corporates that might be considering whether they would issue a social bond. But yeah, any top tips would be super.
Yeah, I don't know if it's
Putting you on the spot, sorry.
but no problem. But I would say a best practice that I would say for corporate, I think it's important to really integrate those gender components explicitly at pre-issuance in the framework, to be explicit about what they want to finance, what are the expected benefits, why they do it, to allocate a significant share of the proceeds actually to those kind of projects. It should not be, one SDG among others and just a label. It should really include concrete action. So I think that's important, that it goes beyond just marketing, let's say. And for investor, it's also to look beyond, to look what is actually a finance, and if there is actually concrete impact and the commitment from the issuer. So I think this is quite still a recent market. It's from our data, we see that it's growing. So there is interest from issuer, from investor, but we also really see different size of ambition and commitment in the markets.
Brilliant. Thank you so much. I think those are, really valuable points to highlight and to keep in mind if companies are thinking of progressing this sort of financial institution. So thank you again so much for the presentation and for taking the time to join us. I really appreciate it.
Thank you, Fiona. Have a good
Brilliant.
session. Bye.
Thank you. Okay, brilliant. So with Vitaline's case study there, we're coming up towards the midpoint of the session. So we'll take our short break soon, but I've just got a little bit more to cover on the other side of this in terms of the promotion side of these products as well. So we're going to talk really about how we can see gender equality themed products being promoted in the market more generally. And at the SSE, we did an assessment of how exchanges are working with their markets to enhance gender equality as part of our guidance for exchanges on this topic. And we found that there are two main ways that markets are promoting gender equality. Firstly, through promoting participation, and then secondly, the promotion of impact. So let's have a look at both of those topics briefly. So what do we mean by promoting participation in markets? Well, on both the supply side and the buy side, we're seeing the application of a gender lens in global markets to access unserved segments of the market. And on the sell side, we see markets sourcing and promoting women-led businesses or female entrepreneurs. For example, we have Sourcing to Equal, which is an IFC-led initiative in partnership with the Women's Entrepreneur Finance Initiative and Norway, and that aims to connect 5,000 women entrepreneurs to new markets via corporate procurement. And I think we have a link to that as well that we can share in the chat with you. And then on the buy side, we can see investment in and support of women traders. And this relates back to what we discussed earlier regarding the different gender lens investment strategies. being both just at the portfolio level, but also within the investment firm itself. And this is because it's been well documented that all male investment teams indeed invest in fewer women-led businesses. And one example of this type of promotion is an annual women-focused investment summit, which is run by the Johannesburg Stock Exchange, called the JSE She Invests Summit. And so this provides both a networking opportunity for female investors, but also the event covers a variety of topics, including financial and investment literacy, as also an opportunity to showcase different ways in which women can invest in the market. So that's just one example from the Johannesburg Stock Exchange of the types of activities that are underway here. And in addition to promoting gender equal participation in markets, we also saw in our study that exchanges and markets promote financial products and companies based on their impact or their ability to actually improve gender equality, either within an organization or in society more broadly. And here we're seeing markets raise awareness of financial products and promote listed products through awards or incentives, really with the objectives of shining and spotlighting on those that are having a positive impact. And we also see markets creating segments or indices that aim to make it easier to find and invest in these high impact stocks or financial products, as we talked about with Harry from Bloomberg in our last session together. And I think it's also important to note that one index can indeed vary from the next. So as you can see here, and as we heard already, in order to truly capture the holistic picture, which we know from our session earlier in the week is important, we also need to look at this topic from many different perspectives. So for example, if these indices were only collecting data on women on boards, this would of course only let us know one aspect of gender equality within a company. And in some instances, this might be what we want to know, but if we're investing with the objective of either directing capital towards companies that enhance gender equality related goals within society and their companies, or perhaps because we understand the value of enhanced gender equality, like the benefits that we talked about earlier in the week, then of course to support this, we're going to want much broader data and a wider breadth of information. However, what you will notice is that the categories of information that we're using can still be quite similar. And so you can use these categories to make sure that you're collecting broad enough data. And as we learned last time, sometimes we might think that we're solving the problem or improving gender equality, but actually we could unintentionally be making things worse. And so one of the key ways to prevent that is to thoroughly understand what's happening in your organization and really gather the data to help you to get to the bottom of that. Okay, so we've got a quick poll for you now. And so the poll that I'll launch on your screen gives you a few options. So I'll just get that up. And so the question is really, why are investors looking for gender-related opportunities? And I think this speaks to a few of the points we've covered in our case study and from the Lux SE team. So are they looking for higher financial performance, to access untapped markets, to enhance climate-related impacts of investments, to prevent men from accessing leadership positions, to diversify their portfolios, or to manage gender risks? And so you can select as many of these as you think are kind of key reasons that investors are investing more and more funds in gender lens investments. So just give everyone a little bit of time to reflect on those points and think which of those may be the correct reasons that investors are focusing on this. Okay. We always like to get at least half of our participants taking part in the poll. I see we're up to about 40% now, so I'll give you a few more seconds. It's always a good way to apply your learning, I think, to make sure you're reflecting on what we're hearing as we go along. Okay. We have a couple more people take part, maybe. No, okay. One more, there we go. Thank you. So let's share the results with you there. So we can see that we've got a mix of people selecting the top 3 answers and the final 2, and no one has selected that 4th answer there. Indeed, that is Correct. So all of these would be correct or potential reasons for investors to look at this, except for the fourth answer. So of course, while gender-based investing can often be seen as possibly a zero-sum game, which might prevent men from moving forward so that women can instead, of course, gender lens investing is not meant for this. And if this is the outcome, then really we're going about this in the wrong way and need to evaluate our approach. So well done, everyone who got that right and took part in that. That's great. And maybe you even know other reasons as well that investors might be looking at these topics. So feel free to share those with us if you have any further thoughts on that. But otherwise, that brings us to the end of our first half of the training today. So we're going to be taking our short break. I think my music and video is working for you this time. So hopefully that'll be a nice way to relax and enjoy a few minutes to perhaps stretch, get up from your desk or grab a quick drink. I know that can often help when we're online, just to have a little moment away from the screen. But if you have any questions that have come up so far whilst you've been listening, feel free to share those with us in the Q&A box during the break as well, and we can respond to those in the second half. But otherwise, I'll start the timer here and we'll reconvene in 5 minutes when we get to the end of the timer.
Okay, welcome back from the break, everyone. Hope you were able to grab a cup of tea or stretch your legs. So we'll get started with the next section, which is on, sorry, I was a bit mixed up with the slides. So we're going to start with communicate. Sorry, tech issues. 1 second, please. Okay, there we go. So we've had a look at some of the financial instruments available to promote gender equality. So now we'll look at an organization how can communicate about their performance on gender equality, which could be one means of accessing these gender-specific finance mechanisms. However, this is not only an important tool for communicating with investors about your impact, but also internal communication is really key to ensure that the culture change that we've repeated so many times on Wednesday and today is a necessary aspect of performance and actually takes place. So this final unit on communication has two main sections. We'll talk about transparency within an organization amongst its employees, as well as with external stakeholders. But to start with, we'll look internally and we'll look at how you can manage effective internal communication. So while there's many methods used to enhance transparency within an organization, what we want to highlight today is the Gender Equality Action Plan as a tool for communicating with internal stakeholders. Now, we're very fortunate to have with us an expert on this topic from UN Women, Anna, and Anna will discuss how the WEPs can be used in action for this purpose. So thank you again for joining us, Anna, and the floor is yours.
Thank you, London. Hello, everyone, again. As we've met at the previous session, I'm Anna from UN Women Europe and Central Asia Regional Office, and I'm leading the portfolio on women's economic empowerment and private sector engagement in our office. Glad to be here again. Last time, we discussed what is WEPs, right? And how we can, what is the framework, how we can sign up. But I think very important is that how we act on it. So if we decide to sign up, and if any of you decided and are thinking to sign up, there are some specific actions which you can take. Again, I'm saying these are suggested actions. This is not mandatory. But usually as the organization, especially in the financial field, I'm sure you like to have very clear targets, very clear KPIs, the very clear actions. So in WEPs, we have developed these tools. One of them is that action plan. But before you start planning for actions, we need to diagnose, right, where we stand. Some of you might have already done a lot of work. Some of you might have collected data. Some of you might have implemented activities. So first, we start from diagnosing and checking where we stand. And there's a very good tool for that, which is called Diagnose Gender Gap Assessment Tool, which is basically a set of online questions, so divided in marketplace, workplace, and community. You can answer those questions and see where you stand. Are you a beginner? Are you an achiever? Are you a leader? So this will help you to diagnose which actions to set where. And the action plan, of course, is something where you have to set very clear goals, right? This is something I want to achieve, and I will achieve through the very specific activities. So when you set your goal, you have to set very specific activities, which will help you to support you to achieve those actions. Very important in this is also to have the baseline. As I said, some of you might have collected the data. So, for example, some of you are looking how many women do you have at the workplace, or how many how many suppliers do you have women? Have you worked on gender bonds? For example, we had some very inspiring examples, right, by the speakers before. So just look at it and gather the data. Because like in everything, I'm sure in all your work, data is the best, gathering data is the best baseline to start our work. After you get the baseline, we have to set the targets and timelines. And now I'm saying this, but I'm sure you're doing this type of action planning about your whole work. So I'm not talking about something new, but just explaining the tool we have developed to support you in this process. Then you set targets and timelines. And of course, differentiate between broad goals and specific targets. For example, if your goal is to create an inclusive workplace, a target could be like 40% women in senior management, right? But if you focus on supply chain, maybe you set a target that, for example, I don't know, 30% or 50% of a gender responsive company should be in my supply chain. We always like to see ambitious targets, but we also want them to be very, very realistic. So give yourself time. You can say that, okay, I have 10% decrease in first year, 20 in second year. So it does not have to happen at once, right? You can have like gradual approach. And one very important point is that assign accountability. We have seen some excellent activities which don't have an owner to say so a person who is accountable for, and they are not implemented. So if you say, okay, I'm increasing number of women in my supply chain, and this is Anna's responsibility because she works in the procurement department, right? So try to create this accountability framework. And important here is that it should not be led or done by one person. The more you work, the more it's a teamwork, the better. I'm saying that's the whole action plan, not only in specific activities, better to assign to one or two people, but the whole action plan should be a collective effort, for sure. So what shall we consider? There are some key considerations which will help us to set the goals. Of course, the first is like if the goal is specific and measurable, right? We need to be able to measure our goals. Is the goal attainable? Is it realistic to achieve this goal given the resources you have? Sometimes we have like excellent aspirations, big ambitions, but we are very limited, like we were 3 people in the team, right? So it's fine. It doesn't mean that it should hinder us, stop us from doing anything, but we should take into account the resources we have. Then you should see if it's relevant to the organization for which you are working. So now all the examples you had about gender bonds, about women-owned businesses, about like other examples which my colleagues were bringing, were all related to financial sector. So this is also very logical because we hope that the goals which you have, the activities which you will select will also help your business development, right? We don't want it to be external and not related to your business, because when it's related to your business and advancing to your business, then we have seen that companies and management of the companies are more motivated. So make sure that it's relevant to your organization. As I said, the clear timeline is something which we need very much. And we also all the time encourage to consult your stakeholders through surveys, group meetings, consultations. And so try to engage your stakeholders. Just to like wrap up once again, very important to secure the commitment of your leadership. Make sure that the leadership on board. I said it last time and repeating it here too. When the management is on board, things get much, much easier. Form a diverse team again. You should not be alone in this work. We've seen one-people teams, again, really very appreciated, and they have done a lot of change, but the more like-minded people do you have, the better. Integrate gender equality in business model. Make sure that it's relevant to your work, as I said, not something standalone. Align with the goal.
Hi, everyone. I think we may have just lost. There, I think we have you back, Anna. Can you hear us?
I'm sorry, there's something disconnected. Do you hear me now?
We do hear you. Yes, all good.
Okay, I'm so sorry. Like something happened and I just got disconnected whilst in the middle of speaking.
No problem.
Yeah,
These
so I
things
was saying that consultative process and relevance to your company is very important. Now I lost my control over the slides. Sorry, if you can switch to the next slide. Yes, perfect. So once you have everything in place, you have consultations, you have baseline, you finalize your action plan. The regular communications with the employees and stakeholders is very important. You can also gather data on your progress because to follow like how you progressed and how you made results achieved. You have a lot of tools to support you in this process. Again, there is a transparency, web transparency and accountability framework, which has over 70 tailored 70 indicators. So you don't have to come up with the new ones. You can choose the ones which are the most relevant to your company. And you can also find much more the resources on the how to do the action plan in the webs.org. If you go to the webs.org/learn website, and my colleagues will share the link, you will see that everything what I mentioned now is very easily outlined there, supplemented with all the resources. And of course, if you have questions, I shared my email last time. I will share it again for you, those who haven't seen it last time, and you can reach out to me. As I said, I'm in the regional office, but we have 16 countries. We are covering 16 country offices, all of the countries which you represent. So I can also put you in touch with UN Women local teams for those who are not still in touch, and that you can seek the support from there. Thank you very much. Over from me now. Back to you, Fiona, in London.
Great. Thank you so much, Anna, for that really helpful overview of the WEPs and the important work you're doing. So moving along, now that we've covered communicating with internal stakeholders, we'll move on to communication with external stakeholders. And to kick this off, let's do a quick poll to see how your organizations are currently disclosing gender-related information. So, oh, there it is. So does your company disclose gender-related information through one or more of these mechanisms? So you can answer, you can select multiple options if that's the case for your company. So there's CSR, ESG/sustainability report, an annual financial report, a gender pay gap report, all of the above, none of the above, or maybe you're not sure right now. So I'll give you a few seconds. If you've already filled in the answer, please feel free to let us know in the chat. What do you think determines where gender-related information should appear? So what factor are you looking for to decide if, for example, information should appear in an annual financial reporting package, perhaps using the ISSB's IFRS sustainability disclosure standards, or perhaps you think it should be in a sustainability report, perhaps using the GRI standards. So if you have any thoughts, please feel free to put them in the comments in the chat. Okay, so we have a bunch of answers now. So we'll end the poll and share the results. So I see, unfortunately, the most answers were actually not sure. So I really encourage you after today's session to see where your company is disclosing gender-related information. So ask someone who might know. And then, of course, if you're not disclosing gender-related information, well, that's what this session helps you learn how to do. And we encourage you to do so. But I see a lot of individuals noted their companies are disclosing via CSR, ESG, or sustainability report, almost as many in an annual financial report. Only a few people noted a gender pay gap report. A couple people actually noted all of the above, and then some noted none of the above. Okay, so we'll leave it there. Okay, we'll leave that question there and talk more about your audience. So who you communicate to defines where you report and what standard you will use. So to report to investors, the primary location for your gender-related disclosures will be in your annual report. The ISSB has also consolidated the major investor-oriented sustainability disclosure standards. And for reporting to other stakeholders, you might use the GRI standards, which are widely used by organizations globally. Together, these standards can form a holistic reporting package to a wide range of stakeholders. You might ask where to disclose different information. So in terms of the content for each type of audience, for investors, you might want to focus your disclosure on financially material risks and opportunities related to gender equality, as well as any other information that can help investors in their investment decisions and engagement with the company. As I said, this goes into an annual report alongside your financial statements and other disclosures. To communicate to a broader stakeholder group, you'd report more about the impact of your business on the environment, society, and economy at large, as that will be more in line with what they would want to know. At the same time, this information will be useful to some of your investors, and it will still support the information you reported in your annual financial report. Looking at the first set of standards, so you can report to your investors in an annual financial report using the ISSB standards, which require your organizations to disclose 4 broad areas, which you might already recognize if you're familiar with the recommendations of TCFD or Task Force on Climate-Related Financial Disclosures. The ISSB S1 standard requires an entity to disclose information about all sustainability-related risks and opportunities that could, and this is a key word, reasonably be expected to affect the entity's cash flows, its access to finance, or cost of capital over the short, medium, or long term. So while the ISSB doesn't yet provide specific metrics or disclosure requirements on gender equality, it does highlight that companies should make use of the SASB standards and GRI standards to identify appropriate disclosures for sustainability-related risks and opportunities. Now, on the second group of standards, we have for multi-stakeholder reporting, we can go through GRI standards, and we previously identified those that are most directly addressing gender equality in the hopes of helping you know where to find guidance on gender equality disclosures for your sustainability reports. So we see gender-related disclosures are a part of disclosures on employees, broken down by gender and region in 2-7, governance structure and composition, policy commitments, and approach to stakeholder engagement. You see the references to the particular sections of the GRI 2 standard on the slide, such as 2-7, etc., and you'll be able to find further information on these disclosures in the full document. So now we have GRI 400. So they have been working towards new modular standards, but we can also take some guidelines from these previous 2016 standards. Although the sectoral and topical standards are being updated, there's still a lot of value to them. If you look at the reporting requirements for both GRI 405, which is on diversity and equal opportunity, and GRI 406 on non-discrimination, we see a few additional guidelines on disclosure of gender-related information. And in both of those guidelines, it's recommended that the reporting organization shall report its management approach for diversity and equal opportunity using GRI 103 on management approach. GRI 202-1 also requires you to disclose ratios of standard entry level wage by gender compared to the local minimum wage. So I know that's a lot of numbers thrown at you, but I encourage you after the session to take a look again at these slides or at the full standards to see how and where gender equality is included and relevant in these different standards. Now that we've looked at those standards, we'll have a few real-world examples to see what this looks like in practice. These examples are just excerpts from actual reports, so they present a piece of the complete picture. They're examples of current practice, and we're not passing judgment on them as to whether they're good or bad practices. but they are just examples of where companies have disclosed and how they've done so. First, we'll look at this governance disclosure from the annual report of Airtel. Airtel is a Nigerian telecommunications company, and in line with the IFRS Sustainability Disclosure Standards requirement, they reported about the processes they use to monitor, manage, and oversee their sustainability-related performance. Airtel noted that the non-financial performance KPIs linked to their sustainability strategy include gender diversity. They also noted that these KPIs are linked to the board's remuneration, which I would say is a pretty strong incentive for the board and leadership to take this seriously. The next example we have is a disclosure example again, but on strategy. So strategy disclosures aim to help the readers of your report to understand your strategy for managing sustainability-related risks and opportunities. Here we can see the report of, or annual report of Astra International, which is an Indonesian conglomerate. Here they outline the importance of the diversity of its employees to its success. Importantly, this statement is then backed up by a roadmap, which you see on the right hand of the screen, and some other actions to manage the opportunity they see through having a gender diverse workforce. In other parts of the report, Astra also goes into additional detail about how the company is implementing this, for example, through programs to make the workplace more suitable for women and through a women development program, which helps prepare women leaders for higher positions. That goes back to what we've discussed before on having a pipeline of women for senior leadership positions. To make sure that there's strong women at the low, medium, high level prepared to take on the senior leadership positions. Interestingly, the Astra, they do say that human and capital development in 2022 covers 3 focus areas, which are to build an agile organization, develop passionate and energetic leaders so as to be able to navigate the organization in facing business challenges, as well carry out the culture of continuous improvement and innovation to maintain their relevancy in the era of disruptions. There's interesting word choice, but in other words, Astra International stated that a more diverse and gender equal business can help to maintain the company's relevancy in that era of disruptions, which I think is an interesting insight into their strategic approach to gender equality. With that, we have a third example of disclosure with risk management. An example of this risk management disclosure, we can look at Coca-Cola HBC's annual report. As a reminder, risk management disclosures are intended to help the reader of the report understand your processes to identify, assess, prioritize, and monitor sustainability-related risks and opportunities. Coca-Cola HBC provided an overview of how they go about identifying material risks, stating, I quote, "To assess inward impacts, we use our annual materiality survey, but also investor-driven frameworks such as SASB, insights from regular calls with investors, our risk management process, including climate scenario analysis, and input from our markets and business units." They also assessed their outward impacts in this matrix, which you see on the left. Yeah, there's a few interesting insights there, but you do see human rights, diversity, and inclusion kind of towards the high axes on both sides. There we go. Now you see it circled. And I think we have time for this fourth example. Just checking the time. Yeah, I think we do. So I'll be brief on this one. So we have a disclosure example on reporting gender-related metrics and targets used by Cemex, which is a Mexican multinational company, which I'll note has been a traditionally male-dominated sector. So it's a bit unique from some other companies and sectors if they're in a less traditionally male-dominated sector. So Cemex stated in its annual report that it's a signatory to the UN WEPs, which of course we just had Anna go through, as well as the UN Global Compact's target gender equality. For this example, we can see the company updating its progress made towards gender equality in its workforce. So you note here on the left, 16% of their workforce is comprised of women. They note that's a 50% increase. I will note that they're probably starting from a lower percentage of women than perhaps a company from another industry, going back to this being a traditionally male-dominated field. This example does, however, show that any business can take action towards gender equality, even in a traditionally male-dominated field. CEMEX also set a new goal to achieve 30% representation of women in senior management positions globally by 2030, which is up from 13% in 2022. This is an example of good goal setting, with its base year set as 2022, a target of 30%, and setting a target year of 2030. I'll note later on in the report, they also report on metrics such as percentage of workforce by gender, percentage of female employees by position, and woman to men remuneration ratio by region. I think that's also helpful as well, disaggregating the remuneration ratio, not globally, but also by region. We've highlighted before, disaggregated data is really important when we're talking about gender equality data collection. So those are the 4 examples on disclosure. But now, in addition to the standards we've gone through, there's some additional organizations that you can look at for more guidance on this topic. And this is also something we'll be publishing a report on soon as well. So there's also the guiding principles for you to consider, such as the UN Charter of Human Rights, the UN SDGs or Sustainable Development Goals, which you're probably familiar with or at least have heard of, the UN Women's Empowerment Principles, which of course we just discussed a little while ago. In addition, it's always important to know what disclosures are required of your organization by law. Beyond this, there's also a number of rankings or benchmarks to consider, such as those from the World Benchmarking Alliance. There's also many indices and rating agencies that take into account the social performance of companies, such as the Bloomberg Gender Equality Index that we heard about from Harry last session. And finally, there's management standards that your organization may wish to adopt, which can help enhance your organization's performance on gender. You can have a look, for example, one slide too far. You can have a look, for example, at the ISO 26000 or 26000 guidance on social responsibility for one of those management standards. And gender equality is also present in many other ISO standards. Going back to SDGs, there's also the SDG impact standards, which are management practice standards designed to guide businesses and investors to embed sustainability into their decision-making approach. So hopefully this helps provide an overview of some of the disclosure guidelines you can consider. Excuse me, but previously we also talked about standards and certifications, excuse me again, that can be used to develop your organization's gender equality practices and disclosures. And with that, we're happy and very fortunate to have David Pritchett here with us from the EDGE Certified Foundation to tell us a bit more about this and the important work they're doing. So with that, the floor is yours, David.
Great, thanks. Thanks, Landon. Very happy, and Fiona and the team for setting this up. Very happy to speak to you for say 10 to 15 minutes, a little bit around our solution at EDGE. I mean, you've seen now, proliferation of these solutions. I think you've seen disclosure requirements, as Landon just has been through. You've looked at rankings, ratings, management based solutions. The EDGE certification is one of those internal management and performance solutions, which has a certification on the back of it. It's harmonized and aligned very much with a lot of the different standards that we've been talked about. So rest assured, it's not completely different to any of those. It just focuses and zones in very, very specifically on optimizing and managing career progression of women in the workplace. It's going to look very, very closely at those core value drivers and underlying factors which determine how a women's career can progress within the organization, some of the hurdles and how to overcome those hurdles, some of the cultural aspects and organizational policies and practices which can support an environment where women can thrive. And it also looks obviously at disaggregated gender, men and women, and it looks at, very importantly, the perceptions of employees to understand a little bit around the culture of the organization and how that culture is being felt from the employee's perspective. So very much aligned to what we've heard from a UN WEPS perspective. It's aligned to the principles 1, 2, and 4. You would have heard from Anna and the team there a little bit around, you know, the corporate leadership area and the representation. You would have heard around the support for fairness at work, some of the education training elements, our standards very much align with that. The GRI as well on some of those, sort of looking at the gender equality in the workplace metrics, and some of the, especially what Harry would have talked about with the gender equality index, and looking at these kind of from a performance perspective. We work with a lot of Bloomberg and similar organizations like S&P Global or Equileap to ensure that our questions are embedded within their methodologies, also to sort of come to this harmonization approach. Let me go into the presentation. What is EDGE? What is the EDGE system? I'm coming from the standard setting perspective. We're not-for-profit organization which sets standards in gender equality. We work with 2 organizations to help organizations to implement the standards. So I'm going to talk about what those standards are, but I think you would have talked with Caroline from IFC earlier and Edge Strategy, who's not on this call. Those are the organizations which are trained and approved to help organizations to prepare for EDGE certification. So those are the organizations that have the skill set to work with organizations to assess the gender equality within their workplace across the different areas and to prepare for an EDGE certification. So what they're going to be looking at and assessing is 4 key pillars of gender and intersectional equity. We're looking at representation. This is where the numbers are. There's different data tables looking at different levels of management, different job types, different functions within the organization, obviously profit and loss functions and support functions within an organization, and how that gender balance is playing out across different management levels and job types. Also looking at recruitment and promotion numbers and how those play out and forecast over the future. We also look at data with pay equity, but we're looking also at the policies and practices of pay. So pay equity in and of itself is a very regulated space, and it's becoming even more regulated as we go forward with emerging regulations in different markets. The third pillar very much looks at qualitative information and assessing the architecture and the effectiveness of policies and practices of an organization to support equitable career flows within the organization. We look there at different focus areas such as pay, such as flexible working, culture, recruitment and promotion, and leadership development, training, mentorship, etc. And finally, as I mentioned, a look at the inclusiveness of the culture. And the only way that we can really do that is by having an employee survey and getting the experiences and perceptions of employees themselves on how they feel the fairness in the workplace is actually being assessed. So three different types of data which we triangulate because they're all connected around the same themes. And we feel with our methodology, we're really able to help organizations assess the core underlying factors which drive a specific dynamic in their organization. Now, Landon would have talked to some of the examples. You know, you would have heard about Cemex, who are EDGE certified, which has got a very male-orientated workforce, and some of the others may be working in personal products or other sectors which are largely female-dominated. You know, and how the different data and the different policies, practices, and the perceptions can look differently from one organization to another. But ultimately, doing such a rigorous assessment will allow an organization to set a a tailored action plan and a roadmap to improve their performance overall in gender equality in the workplace. Our certification system has 3 levels. There's no barriers to entry, which means that if an organization is interested and dutifully goes through the whole assessment, which is fairly rigorous, they will be assessed at the lowest level, which is Edge Assess, which showcases commitment to gender equality in the workplace. And then they have the opportunity to improve their performance and continue their journey and become more mature in gender equality in the workplace and attain Edge Move or Edge Lead certification. And should an organization want to assess gender in intersection with another element of diversity, many organizations are now looking at gender in combination with, say, race, ethnicity, or age, or nationality, or disability, for example, to assess sort of individual profiles and how that shapes a career progression. Can do that with an Edge Plus certification. Let me just run through just very quickly what this would look like for 2 organizations. First one is an energy industry organization, very much male dominated, a little bit like a CEMEX organization. What we did, the Edge strategy team started working with this organization in 2020, and here you can't see it so well on the slide, it's a little bit small, but you have different levels of management and the representation at different levels of management of that organization when they started working with Edge. And the Edge standard requires for certain levels of certification that an organization has 30% of both genders at each level of management. And you'll see here that the red indicates the representation of women, which was below 30% at all levels of management. And the organization itself wanted to diversify their management pools, as well as their succession planning, as well as their actual data. And they set some targets to do so, a little bit like CEMEX, creating a 30% target for gender at different levels of management. And they set an action plan after having done the initial assessment, in different areas which would drive that diversity in the workforce. And they were areas such as pay equity, they were areas such as recruitment, such as promotion, leadership development, training, mentorship, for example, both from a policy perspective as well as an activity or an initiative or a process perspective, as well as measuring the perceptions of the employees. And over 2 certification cycles in 2024, the organization was able to improve those numbers and to have a better funnel, if you like, and balance across the different levels of management, but also in their performance management systems, their top talent programs, their mentorship programs, etc. So very much, pragmatical way to look at this from an architecture perspective, which can drive a certain diversity in the data, because ultimately data is only a sort of a reflection of what is the culture of the organization overall. The second organization is more of a finance-based organization, also has largely male-dominated management, this organization, but they were challenged to in 2022 when they started working with us. They had some policies, but they were very generic policies, and the policies weren't very helpful in terms of gender mainstreaming and having a gender lens throughout the existing policies that the bank had. And so they set about working and assessing the relevance for gender in each of the different policies, such as their recruitment and promotion processes and practices and policies, the leadership development training policies, the flexible working policies and things like that, which are really drivers for creating this environment which enables women to thrive in the workforce. And they did that, and the result was that they had, in 2 years' time, with the initiation of those policies and communication of policies to the team, to the workforce, a better score in terms of maturity of architecture. So 2 very specific examples, again, looking very at different dynamics within an industry, within an organization, a size, etc., and allowing those organizations to have their individual pathways to see how they can best improve their performance. So Edge does work with over 800 organizations. These are some of those from a icon perspective or logo perspective you might recognize. We work across 63 countries, so our standards are applicable to any organization above 100 employees. So we do demand that there's a minimum of 100 employees because the analysis is fairly impactful and comprehensive. It's aggregated and anonymized, which means that in order to have an impactful analysis, we need 100 employees to be able to break it down to different levels of management to do that analysis. But it is applicable for any organization, both public and private, across different countries. There's no sector-based standard. It's a sort of a one-size-fits-all, with recognizing that different organizations have different pathways to achieving gender equality in the workplace. But I'll leave it there. You may have questions, and I'll be happy to take those.
Brilliant. Thank you so much for that, David. Really helpful overview. So we have had a couple of questions come in, actually, which is always nice. So I'll put those to you if that's okay. Sorry, my camera always seems to need a little moment. There we go. It's focused.
Yeah.
So the first question we had was around intersectionality. And I know you touched on that a little bit already, but whether there were any particular tools that you're aware of that can help organizations to consider the sort of intersectionality of gender with other issues.
Really good question. We're seeing it more and more interest from the EDGE was set up primarily as an EDGE gender binary assessment, and we added the intersectionality lens in 2020, 5 years ago. And since then, organizations have been using the methodology to assess gender and intersection. So we're not assessing purely diversity in other dimensions in and of itself. It's always an intersection with gender. And this is really very company specific, because an organization is based in a specific market which has certain cultural aspects to it, certain historical aspects to it, certain regulatory aspects to it. So it's difficult to generalize on which are the best tools out there. But we find it useful to work with organizations firstly and foremostly through surveys to allow employees to self-identify where the HR data might be missing. Let's say looking at race or ethnicity data, looking at LGBTQ plus data, looking at nationality data. It may not be fully mature from an HR system perspective, or even permitted. Many times it's not legally permissible to collect this data. And so you can analyze through engaging in employee surveys, such as the one that we have, and adding some self-identification questions at the start, and running the survey in a purely anonymized way with strict, obviously, barriers to allowing and algorithms to allow that to happen. And then an organization can get a sense of what is the makeup of their workforce and what might be some of the challenges that they want to look at. And then they can start about assessing the needs for policies and practices to address some of those concerns, and then building in the language in those policies and practices as they go forward.
Brilliant, thank you. Yeah, as you say, I appreciate it's going to be highly individual to the company, its context, it's exactly what issues it wants to bring in there. But I think that's a really helpful starting point as a suggestion. And then the second question we received, which I think we kind of touched on at the end, but just for clarity, was about what are the criteria, if there are any, or steps needed to partner with EDGE and obtain the EDGE certification?
Right. No, there's no criteria, if you like. An organization would have to have 100+ employees. That's the minimum criteria, and they have to be committed to running the full assessment. So they can't say, I want to use the data tables and the assessment on the policies practices, but I don't want to do a survey. So you'd have to do all three sources of information to run the analysis, to work with EDGE or to work with IFC. As I said, each of those organizations works independently and prepares organizations for certification. Where I work, it's in the standard setting part of the ecosystem, which means that we are looking at setting relevant standards for organizations to measure their performance. But you can reach out to EDGE Strategy. If you came to the EDGE certification website, there's a link to EDGE Strategy, or you can, if you are connected with IFC or you are one of the IFC portfolio organizations, you can connect with your account manager there, and they will give you information on what it would mean to get Edge certified.
Brilliant, thank you. Yeah, and I know we've shared a link in the chat to the Edge certification website, so people can find the Edge strategy page there. And at the end of our presentation, I think we'll have some IFC contact details as well, so people can reach out on that. But brilliant, I think that probably brings us to the end of the segment. But thank you so much, David, for joining,
Okay, welcome.
for sharing. Really appreciate it.
All right, thanks everyone.
Great. Yeah, so as I said, this is bringing us towards the closing kind of wrap-up segments from our side. So to sort of close off, really, we're going to have a little bit of a reflection back on what we've covered today so far back in Menti. So I will screen share to Menti again. I'll just ask Landon if he could just reshare the link for that in case anyone has closed down the Menti tab in the background. But the question we have just to wrap up on really is to come back to those three sort of learning objectives that we set ourselves at the beginning of the session, and just get a little feel from everyone as to really where you think your comfort level or understanding is at now on those three topics that we started today with an aim to achieve. If I recall, I think we were all sort of somewhere around the 5 on the scale on average previously, and maybe a little bit lower on the investment side of things, or maybe a bit higher was on the investment side and lower on the other two. But seeing some good responses coming in here at this point where we're looking like we've inched definitely beyond the midway point on comfort on average there. So that's fantastic to see that we're feeling as though we've built a bit of knowledge in these areas over today. We do really recognise, of course, that in a 2-hour training session and another 2 hours earlier in the week, there's only so much we can do, but we hope that also all of the resources and links that are available in the handout presentations will be a really helpful resource to support your continued learning. I should say on that front as well that we have our handout presentation from the SSE on the event page, and we will shortly be adding the speaker slides from today to that page as well. So make sure to check back there later today, and we'll have all of that material available for you. And then I just had one final question really to wrap up from today, just to reflect, I think, on maybe across the 2 sessions, you know, from what you've heard in the training so far, what would your key takeaway be? What maybe is your key insight that you've gained or the key action that you want to take away to think about as a result of this session? We know it can often just be helpful. We've covered a lot of content, but to center maybe on a few key things that you're going to take forward as a result of what you've learned today. So we'd ask you just to take a second and to share what that takeaway is for you and your learning or action point that you want to take forward. Okay, gender action plan, fantastic. I know Anna will be very pleased to see that response firstly, and the value of that tool. So that's fantastic. Great. So about the WEPs, the gender bond side of things and looking into that, gender-linked financing. I see someone's mentioned gender standards as well, communications, more on the gender bonds front. Fantastic. Great. No, I'm really pleased to hear that those were hopefully some interesting topics to start to learn about today and to kind of explore offline from this session. Seeing a few things come through about gender diagnostics, gender lens investing. Brilliant. Great. Thank you everyone for sharing those points. And I think we've got time. No, that's the end of the Menti. So I will take us back, and I've got a couple of quick wrap-up slides now just to share some all-important information with you about the certificates and the kind of takeaway resources that you'll have after today's session. All right, so as we wrap up, I think there's a number of resources I mentioned that are available to you to continue your learning journey, and these are ordered by the units that we have gone through. I would like to also just remind everyone that you can download the handouts, which contain many resources and links to what we've discussed for further information. Please do stay tuned as well to SSE's training by subscribing to our newsletter for more relevant training sessions. And all of these resources, including the speaker and partner presentations, can be found on the event webpage. We'll also be posting the recording from today's session on the website too, in case you want to watch back and look at any segments again. And as a quick highlight, I'll just show that within the handout materials, according to each unit that we've covered, there's a page that just summarizes some key resources and studies that you may want to look at offline. So make sure to check out that in the slide handout as well. And so we're really grateful for any feedback that you have on this training. And as a token of our appreciation for taking part in the training, we'll be sending out certificates of participation from the SSE, IFC, UN Women and Columbia University for anyone who completes this feedback survey. So to access the feedback survey, Landon has shared a link with you in the chat there, which will take you to the survey. Another option is within 24 hours from Zoom, so maybe you'll receive it on over the weekend and be able to access this on Monday. You'll also get sent an email by Zoom if you joined us live today to complete the survey as well. So if you miss it in the chat, that's also another option. But if you follow that link and complete the feedback survey, we will then send you via email your completion certificate. We should say it can take up to a week to receive your survey. We do it in batches each week, so please be patient if it takes a few days for the certificate to come through. We also know occasionally organisations do have some problems with spam filters blocking the survey email reaching you. So if you know your organisation is particularly secure in that regard, perhaps recommend using a personal email address to complete the survey just to make sure the email reaches you, and to be sure to check your spam folders as well. And as I mentioned, there's just a few contact details that are included in this presentation for some of the organisations involved today, IFC, UN Women and SSE, and you can refer to the guest speaker slides as well for details about how to follow up with any of these organisations or learn more about their work. But to close us off, I just want to say a thank you again to our guest speakers, Vitaline from the Luxembourg Stock Exchange, Luxembourg Green Exchange, to David from the EDGE Certified Foundation as well, a big thank you. And indeed also to the SSE supporters, who are a group of exchanges, advisors and other organisations really helping to support our work as well. And finally, a big thank you particularly to all of the partners involved in today's training, IFC, the UN Women team, and very much especially to Anna for joining us across both sessions and sharing so much fascinating insight, Columbia University, the Luxembourg government, and of course, a big thank you finally to our group of stock exchanges in the Central Asia and European markets who've brought us all together for this session today and hosted us. And last but not least, of course, a big thank you all of you who participated in the training for your time and engagement. We really hope you've learned something helpful from today's sessions, and we hope to have you join us on a future training session. But in the meantime, we wish you all the very best with taking forward and advancing gender equality in your organisations, and wishing you a great rest of the day. So we'll close off there, everyone. Thanks a lot.